Developers must look at Brooklyn like a kid at the beach with a bucket and a shovel. Check out all this wet sand. Where should I put up my next castle? Pricey co-op, condo, and rental towers are going up all over, and when they're filled, that means thousands of new Brooklynites need everything from standing room on a subway car to schools for their kids.
Well, not to mention, what does all this developmental pressure mean for surrounding communities, their housing, and their infrastructure? Who's planning for all this change, and how much is it regulated? Well, from the Brooklyn Borough Office of the Department of City Planning, we'd like to introduce you to its director, Winston Von Engel. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, gentlemen. It's good to be
Winston.
here.
We're going to get into a lot of issues. We want to start first with the city has poured a lot of money into recent, skyscrapers and developments. We want to know, what's the scale of the infrastructure right now in downtown Brooklyn?
Well, as you know, many of the skyscrapers that you see around here were a result of the 2004 plan that was done in the previous administration, which was a comprehensive plan. And the city at that time did commit $100 million to infrastructure here in downtown Brooklyn, including Flatbush Avenue and the Fulton Street Mall, Willoughby Square open space, which is being developed right now, as well as making sure that sites are available. And it also invested in the infrastructure here in the Cultural District, where we are located right now, here at BRIC, and in fact across the street at the Harvey, and in affordable housing, which is also going up across the street.
So we know that plan was started under the previous administration, and we're starting to see things come to fruition there in the form of great redevelopment, making Brooklyn a 24-hour live-work place. But what aren't we seeing? Like, the towers are evident. What infrastructure changes and improvements aren't as apparent to the naked eye?
Well, I would say one of the new approaches by the administration is to bring that kind of comprehensive look that we brought to bear in downtown Brooklyn to other neighborhoods in a neighborhood scale.
Any in Brooklyn?
For example, right, in East New York, right, gotcha. We just completed a large planning effort there with neighborhood rezoning, where we put in height limits in the mid-block areas, but we also allowed for growth with a requirement for affordable housing. And the city, anticipating that there would be new residents in that neighborhood, committed to building a 1,000-seat school, 1,400 units, 1,300 units of affordable housing for low-income New Yorkers, as well as improvements and investments in parks and transportation.
So East New York couldn't be further demographically than downtown Brooklyn and the communities as they exist already. So are there any particular challenges that are introduced with respect to a place like East New York, where you might be building on brownfields, versus in downtown Brooklyn, where you've got a great tower going up next to something that was formerly lower, or next to another tower? Are there specific infrastructure challenges that come from those two different neighborhoods? So,
I mean, downtown Brooklyn was always a different animal, right? In downtown Brooklyn, we have the densest public transportation network in the city, rivaling Times Square, right, next to Times Square. So building housing and offices on top of such a dense network really makes sense. In East New York, it's not dissimilar. It actually has fantastic public transit access, which allows especially people of low income to live cheaply in our city and to be able to work and live in our city and not have to spend so much money on transportation.
I'm curious about transportation and how an influx of new residents will be supported on the subway systems. I mean, you see buildings going up everywhere, not just here in, down where I live on 4th Avenue and 20th Street. There's these giant, huge apartment buildings going up, and me and my friends are concerned that, are all these people going to be on the R train every day? How is mass transit able to support this influx of new residents?
One of the things that we are trying to do is to try and spread things out a little more, right? So the city's investing in infrastructure and in jobs, for example, outside of the Manhattan core, right? So in downtown Brooklyn and in Sunset Park, as well as in Greenpoint and Williamsburg and in East Williamsburg, right? So spreading out the job, basically catching people before they go into Manhattan, which is really the peak. right? And in fact, we are finding a lot of people now commuting reverse to Brooklyn, right? And ideally, we would have more jobs. We grow more jobs, making downtown Brooklyn, which used to be only a shopping district with offices, a truly mixed-use district, so that people here can live and work here at the same time.
Well, I don't think a lot of the problem may be people commuting back and forth between Manhattan and living in Brooklyn. The fact of the matter is, if towers are going up, the platform on the R train isn't getting any wider anytime soon. So what kind of things do you work on to mitigate those issues of growth?
I think, you know, as you know, the MTA and the subway system aren't under direct city control.
Right.
You know, so we do have a good utilization of the subway system here in downtown Brooklyn. Where the city can make a difference is by targeting direct investments in infrastructure improvements. So, and where we can use, for example, zoning to help that. So, for example, there's a building on Willoughby Street where the zoning actually required, on top of the subway station, that the building set aside a space for an elevator and better access to the subway below. So that removed the stair from the sidewalk and allowed an elevator to go down to the subway level. And you know, in other neighborhoods, need to tout that, right? In East New York, actually, the city set aside, as part of its commitment to the MTA, to add funding to the MTA, asked that the MTA spend money to help residents of that neighborhood make a connection, for example, between the L train and the 3 train, right? Which residents had told us they were really looking forward to. And also improvements to the Broadway Junction station. I mean, there are a lot of people who use actually that station besides the station here in downtown Brooklyn. And that's something that we're really focused on.
Now, let's talk about schools for a second. We see all these new high-rises, and we don't hear a lot about new schools that are being built. What can you tell us about that? I mean, are people moving into these high-rises that just don't have children, or they're able to send their children to private schools? What's being done to create more public schools for people that are moving here?
Right. No, that's a great question, right? So part of it is that some of the population here in downtown Brooklyn specifically don't have as many children, but we are, and we do have a school need here. And so the city actually put in, it had a 300 funded seats, increased that to by 3,000 to 3,300. And so now we're actively looking for locations for schools. The city also used its not its scarce resources, but it used its resources to rezone some of the schools on the outside of downtown Brooklyn, because there are schools outside of downtown Brooklyn that are underutilized, right? And so by taking areas and putting them into other school districts, you can actually rebalance some of the schools. But we do have a project that the Education Construction Fund is working on right here on Skirmahorn Street, just off Flatbush Avenue, where the city will ask a developer to replace an existing school with a larger school.
As part of their overarching plan for their housing to include some sort of school in that same development?
Exactly right.
Okay,
exactly
so
right.
That sounds like a very forward-thinking thing. So thinking about what you said about the MTA and knowing that that's not under the city's jurisdiction, what other contact do you have with people like the Department of Education or libraries or even fire and other services like EMTs? And like, do you guys have a powwow every now and again to say, this is what's happening, this is coming, this is coming, this is coming, get ready? Like, what's that communication like?
No, we do. So we talk to the School Construction Authority, as well as the Educational Construction Fund, as well as the Department of Education on a regular basis. We know about the school need in downtown Brooklyn, right? And when developers come to us, right, and say they want to build a large building, our first message to them is, have you thought about a school in your building?
That's the first message?
That's pretty much the first message, besides, you know, how big is the building and are you going to talk to the community and when are you going to do that? Right? But it is clear that there is a need in downtown Brooklyn for schools, and the city has set aside funds to build a school. So we're looking to partner with private developers to build schools.
Gotcha.
Right? So
Yeah.
I think that's our biggest focus, as well as with the other services. You know, part of this administration focus on neighborhoods is also establishing a fund for infrastructure needs. And so I just want to tout that we have now a division for capital projects in our agency, specifically focused on capital infrastructure and aligning planning goals with budgeting and capital budgeting goals.
Okay, we're completely out of time, but just one like yes or no answer, because they're killing me right now. But are we going to get any Trump money to alleviate this, since Congress seems to be about one voice on infrastructure?
You
Will
know
that
the
trickle
answer to
New
that.
York? That's a no? All right, moving on. Thank you for being here. We appreciate
Winston,
it.
thank you. Thank you very much.